Okay, good evening, comrades. I'd like to welcome everybody to the weekly political meeting of Online Communist Forum hosted by the Provisional Communist Party of Great Britain. As usual, this evening's meeting will be introduced by Jack Conrad, who will speak on the main political issues of the week. Jack will speak for his comrades on about an hour, and then there'll be opportunities for questions and discussion after Jack has finished speaking. So over to you then, Jack.
Thanks, Bob. Well, I'm going to begin with a confession, I suppose. See if I can get rid of me. Oh, I can't do that now. I was trying to get rid of me looking at me. We should have done that in the practice session. It's quite off-putting talking to yourself. Anyway, comrades, I was going to begin with a confession, and that is in terms of what we put as the picture and the subject, opening subject of today's Online Communist Forum. We chose Justin Welby, not because it's the number one issue of the week, although I've got something to say on it, but simply because we'd run pictures of Donald Trump over recent weeks, and quite clearly, if you look at the Weekly Worker, we're still very much covering Donald Trump, and I will go on to deal with Donald Trump directly after dealing with Justin Welby. And of course, you know that Justin Welby has resigned as Archbishop of Canterbury. From my memory, he had a very rapid rise through the Church of England hierarchy. He has a background in the oil industry. He was an oil executive. He comes from, again, memory, from the evangelical wing of the Church of England. And of course, the reason for his resignation is over John Smythe, who died in South Africa in 2017. And of course, John Smythe had a particular, how should I put it, liking of berating, buggering, and abusing young men and boys. And that seems to have been over an extended period, beginning, so we're informed, in the 1970s and only finishing when he actually died. And from all the evidence, Justin Welby knew about this in 2013 and didn't do anything about it. But it has to be said that although the police did some investigation, although it was sort of public knowledge, later on, John Smythe escaped prosecution. And that could have been in part because he was a QC. He was a QC who also, in that sense, came from the right wing of the British establishment. He was the lead prosecutor, and I think it was a private prosecution by Mary Whitehouse. Some of you might not be old enough to remember Mary Whitehouse, but in my brain, there she is, stuck there, anti-permissiveness, anti-smut campaigner, someone who was attacking the BBC for being a purveyor of permissive attitudes and encouraging kissing and sex before marriage and other such sins against the Christian religion. She also prosecuted the National Theatre for staging a production of Howard Brenton's The Romans in Britain. And John Smythe, at least initially, was the lead barrister in her campaign. I can remember the court case, not because I was there, not because I can actually remember the court case, but simply because it was dramatized. And there was one particular scene in Howard Brenton's play that Mary Whitehouse, when she went to see it, apparently she saw a Roman centurion rape a Briton, a British resistance fighter. This was in the period of, the troubles in Ireland. And as far as she was concerned, he actually did rape this Briton, the actor. She saw his penis come out and go in to this actor. Apparently, well, what a surprise. It was a finger, and it didn't go up anyone's bottom. God's sake. So anyway, the fact of the matter is that John Smythe got away with it in part because he was a barrister and therefore could threaten, big costs for the public purse, endless legal points and endless appeals, but also precisely he was a member of the right-wing establishment, and they weren't out to get him. Quite the opposite. From their point of view, he was one of them. But when things did get too hot, what happened to him? He went off to Zimbabwe and after that to South Africa. And we have reports of at the least of 130 victims. I think something like 30 in Britain, the rest in southern Africa. And, the sort of abuse that he subjected these young men and boys to was, quite horrible and actually physically damaging. Either way, the fact of the matter is that Justin Welby wasn't exactly at the center of any conspiracy, but this was clearly a conspiracy that was conducted by the upper echelons of the church and the right-wing establishment. And the fact of the matter is that Welby, since he became Archbishop of Canterbury, lost the trust of his own evangelical wing of the church, and he lost the trust of the right-wing media. So they were out to get Welby. Here was the particular occasion that they chose to use. Okay, just a quick note on the Church of England. What the significance of the Church of England is, of course, is it's the state church. It is the official church in England, not in Scotland, not in Wales, and obviously not in Northern Ireland. But I went, for example, to a Church of England school. I got my interest, my passion in terms of atheism, thanks to a church education. Something like a third of all schools in England are religious schools. The majority of them are Church of England. Something like 30% are Catholic. And then you get into a small minority, I think it'd be about 4% of the rest, which would be Muslim schools. There is a Sikh school, and I think there's a Hindu school. But the point I'm really making here is that the Church of England is the establishment church. It has representation in the second chamber. So Justin Welby was a member of the House of Lords, along with a load of other bishops. And of course, when we have national occasions such as royal weddings, royal funerals, royal christenings, national remembrance days, we get the Church of England. I don't get up early enough to listen, I have to confess, but we do get on the BBC. It's rumoured that we get daily prayers. I do listen to Radio 3 evening services. but the Church of England permeates British culture. And of course, this dates back to Henry VIII. I haven't watched Wolf Hall, but this is the sort of historic period that we're talking about. Again, because I don't use cash anymore, I might be wrong here, but if you look on coins, as far as I know, around the edge, you'll find something in Latin, which I think goes something like defender of the faith. I presume that's around the monarch's picture. This dates back to Henry VIII, who was awarded that title by the Pope. But of course, we all know that Henry VIII broke with the Pope. We've got marriage and all the rest of it. But this is the rise of the nation state. This is what's going on, and specifically the English nation state. So the Church of England actually begins, and it is in many ways a nationalized form of Catholicism. So the church services that I attended as a wee little nipper were, to all intents and purposes, Catholic, along with, we didn't drink the blood, but all of that sort of type stuff. The church that I used to attend, actually, my nearest and dearest had never been in a church in her life. We went up there one Christmas, and I know I'm rabbiting now, but she'd never sat through a Christian service. And when the vicar asked us to come to the front to drink Jesus's blood and eat his bones, she was pulling on my sleeve and saying, "Let's get out of this place because these people are crazy." And I was saying, no, this is what they believe. It's part of the religion. What? They're cannibals? So from an outsider's point of view, it is a very strange church. But the Church of England really nowadays ranges from a nationalized form of Christianity all the way over to happy clappy, born again evangelicals and fundamentalists, you name it, it's in the Church of England. And indeed, I've come across more than twice in my life, vicars, including in our own ranks. That's the ranks of the CPGB, both the provisional, central committee version of the CPGB, but also the official CPGB. I've come across vicars there who don't believe in God, didn't like the Church of England, but viewed being a vicar basically as a job equivalent to a social worker. Anyway, I just wanted to end this particular section by saying two things. And that's, first of all, that the CPGB historically and today in our draft program stand for the disestablishment of the Church of England, the separation of the church and the state. That's a basic, not Marxist demand, but basic democratic demand that goes way back in history. Democrats do not support state churches. So note the American Revolution, its commitment not to have a state church. So the writers of the Constitution had it in their DNA in terms of opposition to state churches. But the second point I wanted to make is a historic point, not in terms of long history like Henry VIII, but relatively recent history. And that is something like 2 decades ago, when the Socialist Workers' Party was playing the leading role in Respect, along with George Galloway and other individuals such as Nick Rack and Yvonne Ridley, Alan Thornett, but also the Muslim Association of Britain, the British wing, the British branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. In particular, the individual I can remember is Anas Ultakriti, who was the leader of MAB at the time. But so sensitive, so unwilling was the SWP to offend Muslim voters and the Muslim contingent, the Muslim wing of respect, it not only voted down things like a woman's right to choose an abortion, things like that, it voted down secularism. And our motion to the Respect Conference explained what secularism was. It's not about buying. It's not about persecuting religious people. It's about the equality of all religions, but also the equality of people who are religious and people who are not religious. People have the right to hold agnostic views, atheist views, Hindu views, Sikh views, Muslim views, and all the different varieties of Christianity. And there should be freedom of debate. That's what secularism means to us. But for the SWP, in the form of socialist worker editor at the time and national organizer previous to that, Chris Bambury, apparently secularism equals Islamophobia. That if you're secular, you have to hate, oppose, want to persecute Muslims. Well, there's nothing further from my mind. It's true that if you look at Albania under Enver Hoxha, it was the world's only atheist state, and it did persecute religious people. There's no doubt about that. But for me, that's got absolutely nothing to do with our socialist project or our Marxist principles. It actually is closer to anarchism of the Bakunin type. He was the one that coined the phrase, if I'm not wrong, we'll hang the last capitalist in the entrails of the last priest, or it might have been the other way around, but you get the idea. Well, that's got nothing to do with our program. But the SWP voted down secularism. And indeed, it even went as far as amending a motion to the Respect Conference calling for a single secular democratic Palestine. And of course, what they objected to wasn't one Palestine. It wasn't the democracy side of it. It was the S word. And in the words of the future industrial organizer of the SWP, one Nora Nolan, I must admit that I've attempted to find out what happened to the comrade. I haven't been able to find out. Either way, she said, it's all very well, I believe in a single secular Palestine, but we shouldn't be 15 steps ahead of where people are at. And therefore, we shouldn't stand for a secular Palestine. This was too much, thank God, for Alex Kalinikos, who used his column in Socialist Worker to claim that Respect was a united front between what he called Muslim activists and secular socialists. Well, secular socialists who vote down secularism. It doesn't make any sense to me. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, we had not only the SWP take that line, but so did what is nowadays called anti-capitalist. No, it's not. It's anti-capitalist resistance, the Mandelites in Britain. And they said, well, Respect's a broad organization. So how can you put forward secularism? Well, I've got news for the comrades, and that is that Marxist Democrats advocate secularism for society as a whole. And you can't get much broader than society as a whole. It is not some sort of equivalent of some article of faith that we keep to ourselves. No, this is something that we recommend to society at large. So I think when it comes to the SWP, it isn't a question of forgiving and forgetting. We shouldn't forgive and we shouldn't forget that disgraceful example of opportunism. Why? Because the same method is there in terms of their so-called united fronts, actually they're popular fronts, and that is the common denominator. You reduce what is required for unity to the lowest level. And as John Rees pointed out before, the Respect project. The problem with Popular Fronts is it's the right wing that set the agenda, because the right wing says, if we don't get our way, we'll walk. That was going to be the case with George Galloway, the SWP feared. That was going to be the case with the Muslim Association of Britain. Interestingly, therefore, one Peter Manson, editor of the Weekly Worker, interviewed said Anas Al-Takriti and said to Anas, what do you think of secularism then, Anas? And Anas says, well, what do you mean by secularism? Peter explained equality between all religions and equality between people who are not religious and who are religious. And Anas turned around and says, well, that seems to me perfectly acceptable. In that case, if that's what secularism is, I'm a secularist. So there you are. Anas Al-Takriti could stand for secularism. The SWP couldn't because it was fearful of upsetting him when it didn't need actually to be fearful. But as I said, the reason I bring it up is because that method continues to inform the SWP's politics and so much of the politics in Britain and internationally. Okay, well, I promised it. I'm not going to deal with it in detail. We've got Paul DeMarte, our excellent Paul DeMarte, commissioned to write an article on Trump's appointees. To my knowledge, Trump appoints 15 members of the cabinet, and I know that they have to be confirmed by the Senate. So some of these guys might not get through. Others will also have to go in front of, the Senate to be investigated. But there are also 1,000 other posts that the new administration is responsible for appointing. So unlike in Britain, where you have a sort of permanent professional civil service, in the United States, they bring in a load, not just one or two or three, but a load of political appointees. Anyway, what we have is a right old collection, don't we? Okay, Mark Rubio, California, not California, what am I talking about? Florida. He keeps quiet, apparently, doesn't he? That his parents actually came from Cuba, not because they were persecuted by Castro, but Batista. He doesn't exactly go around waving the flag on that one. Batista, of course, was a sort of mafia boss, and it was Castro that cleaned out the mafia, and a load of them, of course, end up in Florida. Either way, you could describe him as a right-wing hawk when it comes to Iran and China. There's no doubt about that. And he's, of course, being tapped to become Secretary of State. So the top diplomat for the United States. Well, in terms of how the rest go, he counts as Mr. Sensible. Because you start looking down the rest of the list, and quite frankly, is Trump taking the piss here, or is it the equivalent? I know it might be an apocryphal story, or is it the equivalent of Caligula, the Roman emperor who appointed his horse to the Senate, and the Senate, of course, agreed to his horse. Again, it's a story. I don't know whether it's true or not. But precisely to illustrate his power and his contempt for the Roman Senate, which of course had become, to all intents and purposes, a talking shop. The real power lay with the emperor. So he might have actually done it. Either way, that's how it strikes me with Trump. I've got the majority. I'm president. I control both houses of Congress. I control the Supreme Court. I'm going to illustrate my power, precisely by choosing people who, your jaw drops when the suggestion is made. So we have Mike Huckabee, appointed. He's one of the, not cabinet members, but one of the 1,000 appointees. He's going to be, at least as far as Trump is concerned, the ambassador to Jerusalem, capital of Israel, official capital. And he's someone who, although the words come out, says he doesn't use the word West Bank. So he says there's no such thing as the West Bank. There's no such thing as the occupied territories. There's only Judea and Samaria. Palestinians, it's not their land. He's a Christian evangelical, of course. It's not their land. We all know that God gave this land to the Jews. So it's their land, and they're just coming back to claim what is rightfully theirs. And who can argue with God? Now, of course, there is, a trail of thought amongst evangelicals that think that with the return of the Jews to Israel, they've got to build the temple. This will be the sign for the second coming of Jesus. This will be the end of times. But Jesus will return to the earth, and it will be heaven on earth. So at least they're motivated by nice things. I suspect that people like me, if I'm around to see it, will of course burn in hell. And the Jews, by the way, have to convert to Christianity. We didn't mention that one. They don't tend to wave the flag too much on that one. But anyway, he's going to be the ambassador to Israel, and clearly he would be supportive, and one would reckon Marco would as well as President Trump, in terms of the final solution in Palestine. And I use the words advisedly, i.e. ethnic cleansing, and if that doesn't work, genocide against the Palestinian population in Gaza, but also on the West Bank. I think that is a real danger in the near future. Okay, who else do we have? You couldn't make this one up, could you? I haven't got his name written down properly, and I haven't got my glasses on, but Pete, someone will tell me. Peg Smith, I know that has to be the wrong name, but he's... Yeah, thanks. He's the Fox News guy. The guy has been in the army. He did serve, I think, in Afghanistan. But you could imagine the generals, what they're thinking. This loudmouth idiot is coming, and he's going to be in charge of us. Good God. He's not a serious military man. He's a mouth that appeals to the Donald. What else have we got? Let me get my notes together. Here we are. We've got Elon and Vivek. They're going to be in charge of Doge, which just happens to be the name of a cryptocurrency being promoted by Elon. Elon seems to be appointed not just to head this particular, which apparently he's advertising for people to work for it, 80 hours a week for free. He wants revolutionaries to join his campaign against bureaucracy. I would not dismiss this. When Musk came in to take over Twitter, he laid off a load of people. He laid off people basically when it came to the moderating and safeguarding side of things. I could imagine him doing that in the army, in the navy, in environment, you name it. I can imagine a big clear out happening. I can imagine big privatization and big bucks to be made by private agencies. So I do take that seriously. But yeah, he's promising to save, I think it's something like $1 trillion or something like that, but a huge amount of money in terms of government spending. I don't buy that one, but in terms of what the government does in terms of directly employing people, I take that threat seriously. Trump clearly wants to clear out what he considers people who are soft, people who are politically correct, people who are, use again his phrase, woke, and that includes in the army. Remember, the American army was rebuilt, in light of the Vietnam War, and became an inclusive institution. It became an empowering institution, because in the Vietnam War, you had so many instances of black soldiers fragging their officers. So, almost a situation of civil war on the American side. So he wants to get rid of that, and he wants to carry out that purge throughout the government machine. Mark Gatz, Attorney General, he's someone who's under investigation, apparently not if he becomes Attorney General, over sex charges. Now, I don't know what the law is in the United States, but I think this would refer to sex with someone who was under 18, but also it involved drugs, apparently. And he's making this guy the top top lawyer in the country. Again, could you make it up? And I think, the one who takes the biscuit, to use a phrase, is JFK Jr., what do we call it? A vaccine skeptic. It's a bit like a climate skeptic. Do you think the climate exists? No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who considers vaccines either as part of some plot or they're actually dangerous for you. And that has real consequences. In Britain, we had the scare, didn't we, over MNR? Don't know if anyone remembers that, where basically they were blaming, kids having autistic conditions on the fact that they had this triple jab. It turns out that this was nonsense, but of course it has real life consequences, because you can die of whooping cough, you can die of measles. When I was a kid, we were looking forward to having measles because it gave you a week off school. But 1 in 100, or wherever the particular figure is, people who get it either suffer, life conditions, or can die as a result of it. So I think maybe, again, I'm just making this up, but maybe 1 in 1,000 who get such a disease. Either way, this was the case during the COVID pandemic, and you had people like JFK basically saying that this disease wasn't real, the vaccine didn't work, and the vaccine, of course, did have side effects. Some people did die of it. There's no denying that. When I've got my vaccine for COVID, I'm more doing it, actually. I know I'm not into the science, and I've been told I talk bollocks when it comes to that, but I've always done it in my own head, at least, for the benefit of the whole, not my individual benefit. So my idea is, well, you should have killed this COVID thing to begin with, which you could have done if you'd gone in early and isolated people and all the rest of it. But instead, it's spread, and it's now become the equivalent of the flu. And I'm not saying it's as severe; it's more severe than the flu. But nonetheless, that's what's happened. It didn't need to happen, and one of the reasons, I'm not saying the reason, but one of the reasons is so-called vaccine skeptics such as JFK. Jeremy's brother also comes to mind, but there are thousands and thousands of people who think along those lines nowadays. And you put him in charge of medicine, all you need to do is look at the shares globally of big drugs companies, and they've plummeted. So, what do they call it? Zeneca, Beat, all these drug companies. I'm not going to go through the name, I haven't got them written down, but all of their shares have gone boom, because he's spoken about things like, let's have a moratorium, an 8-year moratorium on giving people vaccines. I remember when I was a kid, sorry for going on in this way, it's an old person's privilege, but I remember in my school having teachers who'd had polio, people who'd been in an iron lung and just survived, people who were crippled because of polio. Now, no one, at least in countries like Britain, should or does suffer from such a disease because of vaccination. So this really reminds me of the sort of campaign that was conducted by the right wing, by the popular press. It wasn't it against Jenner, if my memory serves me right, the guy that got people to be injected with cowpox as an immunization against smallpox. And you had these cartoons by Gilray of people turning into cows and all the rest of it. But injecting people with cowpox worked. People might have had a sniffle or two, but it worked against this deadly smallpox disease that was responsible for killing thousands of people every year. So who knows how many of these people will get through the Senate. My understanding is that that Musk is threatening those Republicans who don't vote for Trump's choice. He's threatening them, well, we'll unseat you. We'll run someone against you when it comes to the next set of elections. I would take that threat seriously. So who knows what these people will do. So a collection of real oddballs, lackeys, sycophants, but also people such as Elon Musk, people on the make. And I don't know what's happening at the moment with shares in X or his car company, but I very much suspect that they're on the up and up. Okay, two more items, 37, so we're running on schedule. I just thought, very brief mention, I've written about it in this week's edition of the Weekly Worker, that's Ukraine. Not going to cover the whole lot. I did that last week simply to say, well, what a surprise. We all expected it. It's a bit like saying that the sun will rise tomorrow. So I don't claim any great powers of prediction. Well, what a surprise. Over the winter months, Russia will be droning and missiling Ukrainian grid and power sources. And we've gone from a situation where there was expected to be a 6 gigawatt shortage in terms of electricity for Ukraine. And in terms of the latest series of strikes, we're told that that has taken out 9 gigawatts of power. Now, some of that's repairable, some of it's not going to be. And what we're told is if things continue in this way over winter, then you're going to go from what was expected, which was going to be 5 hours of power cuts for ordinary Ukrainians in the day, to a situation of where if, for example, and again, I've just looked it up, if temperatures go below minus 15 degrees centigrade, and in the winter in Ukraine, it can go down, that's what my Google search tells me, it can go as low as minus 20, then we're talking about the possibility of 20 hours without electricity supplies. Now, I don't think that means that Ukraine is about to surrender, but at the moment, things are looking very much for the reasons I touched upon last week, and we've got the front page on it in this week's Weekly Work. Ukraine is looking now like a pack of cards, and we're talking about that. A collapse is quite possible because morale matters. It's not just how many tanks you've got, how many anti-missile missiles you've got, how many men in the field that you've mobilized. It's what's in there matters. That matters in terms of the civilian population, but it also matters when it comes to fighter pilots, guys manning the trenches. It matters. And the fact of the matter is that we've got Trump coming in. We all know what's going to happen, at least initially. Crimea is going to be ceded to Russia. Who knows about the Donbass? Either all of it, part of it. Who knows about the South? Part of it. Maybe that will be traded for the Kursk enclave. But there is the possibility of a negotiated peace, a forced negotiation. Zelensky has no choice in the matter. Now, that might lead to the overthrow of Zelensky. I don't know, but it's quite conceivable. But if, for example, you did get an Azov regime, what could they do? They could fight a guerrilla warfare in the east. They maybe continue to have a front line, but it's not going to last, is it? It's not going to last without the backing of the United States. Boris Johnson's idea that British troops will come in, this is nonsense. There's no way British troops would be deployed in Ukraine without the say-so of Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump might decide to say, Europeans want to fight this war, you go ahead, I'll sell you the money, I'll sell you the equipment. Maybe. It's worth noting on this one as well, the phone call between Olaf Scholz and Putin, first time in 2 years. What's he picking up the phone for? Well, basically, because of Donald. And Germany clearly has an interest in peace, in Ukraine, the resumption of oil and gas supplies, but also Germany has an interest, no sign of it at the moment, of uniting core Europe around itself. I've called that provocation, but I think it's true, some sort of Fourth Reich. Now, that doesn't mean an emperor, but it does mean a German political and economic space. And that isn't going to come from present day EU structures. You can't get it through that. You've got vetoes, you've got all sorts of silly things like that. So who knows what's going to happen? But that's the drive that's there. The drive is there for Germany to become an independent imperial player, something it evidently isn't today. It's a puppet of the United States, a puppet whose face was put in the dirt, presumably by a CIA operation with the blowing up of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, obviously at the say-so of the US president. That's utter humiliation. No wonder Germany is talked about being the sick man of Europe. Okay, just to final comment on that one, just as we talked about shares in the United States of drug companies and car companies, EV companies, worth noting that Ukrainian bonds have shot up. And that's investors basically saying that with peace, Ukraine's worthwhile investing in. So in terms of slicing up the rump of Ukraine, various hedge fund managers, capitalists are looking to make a killing, as they've done with the Ukraine war. They hope to do the same with the Ukraine peace. Lastly, Financial Times article, you can read it elsewhere, but talking about Trump administration and Iran. First move talking about is to bankrupt the country, and that will be done by tightening up sanctions. Note, over the last 4 years, Iranian oil exports have gone up three times, mainly to China. And showing how the world works, the United States can squeeze that off, can squeeze it off through the use of the dollar, but also the insurance market. It can sanction China for the use of Iranian oil. It can block Chinese exports as punishment for using Iranian oil. I don't think that the United States will bankrupt itself through imposing sanctions on China. It's true that many economists warn of inflation in the United States, but the United States isn't proposing, that's my understanding, when it comes to China, to impose a uniform 60% tariff. It would range from what I've been told, what I've read, from 10%. But on the other hand, maybe they get rid of that because of certain capitalists lobbying Trump and Musk and the administration, but up to 60%, yeah, to choke off Chinese growth, to tip China into the same sort of situation that we saw with Japan in the 80s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, what is called the lost decades in Japan. So Japan went from, in terms of the popular media, just about to overtake the United States. That's what it was going to do, because just look at the growth rates that it's achieving, to a situation of anemic or negative growth. That's what the United States is threatening to do to China. Will there be a deal with Iran? It's not impossible. Now, again, you're in the same position as I am. Do you believe the stories? I do. Elon Musk in New York meets the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations. Presumably, they were talking about some sort of deal. And I presume that Elon wasn't acting alone. I presume that he'd passed it with the Donald before he made his approach. I'm guessing, but that's how it would strike me. Now, Iran says that this meeting didn't happen. That's because of its own internal divisions. But my understanding is that all factions of the regime want a deal. Now, whether they get it, that's a different question. If they do a deal, what the United States, what Trump is demanding, is no more financing for proxies. That's Hamas, that's Hezbollah, that's the Houthis in Yemen, and no more nuclear weapons grade uranium. It's not that Iran has nuclear weapons, but it's one step away. It could go for nuclear weapons. That's the situation. So maybe it has to do what it did last time round and export its weapons grade uranium to Russia or some other such country. Who knows? On the other hand, Trump might just say, hey, you know what? They dissed us over the hostages in the American embassy. They've dissed us all the way since 1979. Well, of course, we're not going to invade Iran. Iran isn't an Iraq. It's a vastly more populous country. But look what happened in Iraq when they did it anyway. They're not going to do that. But to wreck the country, that's quite possible. To use a phrase from the Vietnam War, bomb it back into the Stone Age, put sanctions on it so it cripples its industry. Let Israel loose on Iranian energy. That's conceivable. Now, peace is conceivable. That sort of war is conceivable. We just don't know. And so while I've said that peace is conceivable, for example, in Ukraine, the opposite is also the case. And Trump is there quoted. I've quoted him in this week's Weekly Worker, saying, look, if Putin doesn't play ball, doesn't settle for a reasonable settlement, whatever the hell that is, I have a big stick. And what I will unleash is not only sanctions, tougher sanctions against Russia. I will supply Ukraine with the hardware, but I'll also give the green light to the use of Storm Shadow and other such missiles. And while Storm Shadow might be at the top of Zelensky's victory plan, it goes all the way down to 3 secret clauses. I haven't got a clue what those 3 secret clauses are, but it could be precisely NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. It could be, guess, could be the use of missiles stationed in Poland and Eastern Europe against incoming Russian drones and Russian missiles. It could be, speculation again, it could be NATO membership for Ukraine. In other words, it could be a NATO-Russia war. So Trump's administration basically is one of extraordinary unpredictability. And anything that we thought was certain is now uncertain, I would argue, apart from one thing, and that is the main enemy, how the United States is moving ahead in terms of its attempt to reverse its relative decline. Is it's determined that China will be stopped. China is the main enemy of the United States. China represents a full spectrum. It's way, way behind the United States, but it's the only, at the moment, viable challenger to US hegemony. And so, again, we don't know it, but we could at least speculate about the possibility of why is Trump offering Putin a deal? Why is he offering the FSB regime a deal in Moscow? What's he want in return? Is it just peace? Or is it turning Russia against China? We don't know. We don't know. Could he do a deal with Iran? Yeah, he could. On the other hand, this could be precisely for the reasons I said, an awful lot of Russian oil, an awful lot of Iranian oil goes cheap to China. And if we want to do down China, well, okay, do a deal with Iran and put that oil on the world market instead of it going on the cheap to China. That's it, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Comrades,